Children at play aren't focused on being safe, and they shouldn't need to be. A well-designed playground minimizes risk by making the best use of space available for play equipment. Spacing equipment and clearly marking use zones can be thought of as passive ways of protecting children.
There's a general principle in injury prevention that every one of us can apply, teachers and parents and other members of the community. The principle is that if you can use some kind of a passive way to modify the environment to minimize the likelihood that someone will take a risk, an unacceptable risk, that's better than depending on supervision alone to prevent that.
In a playground with significant hazards, even with active supervision, the risk of serious injury is unacceptably high. Supervision and layout need to work together.
Layout is the number one thing I see that people don't pay enough attention to. Just things you wouldn't think of, like sight lines for supervision. Layout can affect that greatly. Also the types of equipment, making sure they're age appropriate and they're separated to keep larger children playing around smaller children where collisions could happen.
Collisions occur in play areas when they're overcrowded. When children are running, tag, really is the number one game on any playground, and so children are often running on playgrounds, and if a playground isn't well laid out, they can crash into playground equipment.
Playground design should take into consideration the ways children are likely to use a play area. For example, bicycle paths should not cross high traffic areas where children may run into a moving bike. Swing and slide exit use zones should not overlap with other equipment use zones. In general, it's better to have more space and less equipment than to have equipment crowded into an inadequate space. Remember, no amount of supervision can protect children when a playground is improperly laid out. When it comes to play equipment, one size does not fit all. It's not safe for very young children to play on equipment designed for older children, or for older children to play on equipment designed for smaller children. For kids, the fun in play equipment lies in the challenge presented by slides, swings, and climbers. But when the challenge is beyond the child's skills, there is a significant risk of injury. That's why play equipment is designed to meet the needs of specific age groups.
There are actually two standards for playground equipment. One is for children 6 months to 2 years, and the other is for children 2 years to 12 years. But the second standard, the one that's for 2 years to 12 years, is broken into two age groups, 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. So there's really three age groups that we're looking for, designing for on the playground.
Early childhood educators need to provide different play equipment for younger and older children. Equipment designed for younger children is, as you might imagine, closer to the protective surfacing and smaller than other equipment. This play equipment presents appropriate challenges for older infants and toddlers, but the risk of failure, of falling from lower heights, is acceptable for younger children. Older children shouldn't use equipment designed for young children. The reduced height lowers the risk of injuries from falls, but since the equipment doesn't present an appropriate challenge, older children tend to misuse these play structures, creating their own challenges and getting hurt or damaging the equipment. Play areas with equipment for younger and older children should be separated by a barrier to control access. Playgrounds should also be clearly marked so that adults who may be unfamiliar with age restrictions can direct children to the appropriate space for play. There are some pieces of play equipment that are unsafe in all circumstances and should not be used by young children at any time. This equipment is typically designed for older children or young adults, or has become unsafe through damage. When you evaluate unfamiliar equipment, keep in mind the risk posed by heights.
Let's think about some of the things that are unsafe on equipment. Equipment itself a lot of times provides elevated play areas for children. Anytime you have elevation, you've added a new a new element of danger because I can fall or jump or whatever off of it. And the higher I fall from, the more dangerous it becomes. So just the elevation itself can never be fully compensated for by simple supervision. Because if there's no safety surface below, no matter how close I am to you and the fact that I'm watching and engaging you, unless I can catch every child that might fall or jump, which is probably impractical, there's still a chance a child can get hurt.
Trampolines cause many injuries each year and should never be used in a group care setting. Current data on the use of netting and other safety equipment with trampolines indicates no reduction in injury rates, so trampolines can't be made safe for early care environments. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the smallest and youngest participants are usually at greater risk for significant injury, specifically children 5 years of age or younger. 48% of injuries in this age group resulted in fractures or dislocations. Common injuries in all age groups include sprains, strains, and contusions. Many injuries have occurred even with adult supervision. Heavy, molded form swings like those shaped as animal figures are a common source of injury. Double occupancy swings are also dangerous. These types of swings both carry added weight and generate too much force for collisions with children. Free swinging ropes, exercise rings, and trapeze bars are not safe for any age on the playground. These items are usually used in indoor gym areas under strict supervision. Remove the equipment or don't let children in a play area with this inappropriate equipment. Since tripping injuries typically don't involve falls from elevated surfaces, injuries will be less severe than falls onto hard surfaces. But a child can experience an injury to the face, head, or other body parts by tripping and falling into another child or onto a play structure. Many tripping hazards can be removed just by paying attention to the environment.
To minimize tripping hazards, the teachers should be monitoring the area where the children are playing, making sure that they're putting away toys after they're using them. If children are taking off their shoes to play in the sand, that they're put in an appropriate place. After they're finished with their helmets, make sure that they're putting them away. So definitely doing monitoring of what the children are using and making sure things are getting back into the place where they belong. Additionally, they could sweep the area if they have a mulch surface to make sure that that's not a tripping hazard. And then again, making sure that there isn't any debris or clutter or broken branches or anything like that kind of scattered about the area that could be a tripping hazard.
Teachers can watch for hazards that are brought into the play area, but some hazards may be a permanent part of the play space. Take note if children are tripping due to flaws in the equipment or installation, like an exposed support footing on a play structure, or because a natural element like a tree root is exposed. These kinds of problems may not be easy to correct, so you may need to restrict children's access to an area with this type of hazard. Very young children are just learning to navigate through their environment and are easily upended by loose materials. Older children engaged in active play may not notice unexpected tripping hazards. You can prevent many unnecessary falls by being on the lookout for items that can get in the way of a moving child. A child suffers a crush or shearing injury when part of his body, usually a finger or toe, gets caught in a moving piece of play equipment or is cut by a sharp edge. Modern play equipment that meets design standards make these injuries less common than in the past, but older equipment like seesaws and merry-go-rounds or newer equipment that is damaged can cause crush or shearing injuries. When you evaluate the safety of play equipment, look for sharp edges by feeling in places children are likely to grab, like the top and chute edges of slides and edges of barriers. Look closely at any area that shows signs of damage where sharp edges may appear due to broken pieces. Pay particular attention to equipment with moving parts like suspension bridges, track rides, merry-go-rounds, and seesaws. Children are talented explorers. If there's a crush or shearing hazard in your play area, they will eventually find it. Take the time to find these hazards before the children do. An entanglement injury occurs when clothing a child is wearing gets caught in a piece of play equipment. Most of the time, entanglement is an inconvenience, as a child is able to get loose on his own or with the help of an adult. But children have died by strangulation due to entanglement hazards on playgrounds.
Entanglement is caused when a string or a necklace or a latchkey get caught on typically small pieces of hardware like bolts or screws that stick out from a piece of playground equipment. The best way to prevent entanglement on playgrounds is not to have children wearing anything that could get entangled. So we warn children against that, and parents obviously, against having strings and hoods, latch keys, jewelry, anything loose and dangling really should not be worn on the playground.
An impalement injury occurs when a child falls onto a sharp piece of play structure that extends away from the surface of the equipment. Equipment that meets standards is designed to prevent these kinds of injuries. Entanglement and impalement are most often caused by hazardous projections. An example of a hazardous projection is a bolt that extends more than 2 threads beyond the nut. Exposed bolts should be covered with rounded fasteners. Make sure the protective fasteners are attached tightly to the bolt. A gap here presents an entanglement hazard. Well-designed and installed play equipment limits entanglement and impalement hazards, but these kinds of hazards may be present with older equipment or with new equipment that isn't regularly inspected and properly maintained. Head entrapment is a serious hazard when young children use play equipment because children have died by strangulation when they are unable to escape after becoming caught in a tight space. Equipment should be designed to eliminate entrapment hazards. A child can become entrapped in play equipment when he's able to fit his feet and body through an opening, but is unable to follow through by fitting his head through the same opening. Sometimes a child can fit his head into an opening, but then, once his head is inside the opening, he turns his head in a way that prevents an easy withdrawal. This situation is most dangerous when it occurs on equipment that is raised above the ground, like the tops of platforms. Even a child with his feet on the ground can strangle if he panics or can't figure out how to escape. To prevent entrapment, openings should either be large enough for a child to fit entirely through or too small to climb into. The appropriate dimensions for openings for children between 2 and 12 years of age is either less than 3 1/2 inches or greater than 9 inches. For children under 2, openings should be less than 3 inches or greater than 9 inches. Playground inspectors use probes that simulate the size of a young child's body and head to test equipment for entrapment hazards. Over the past few years, there have been multiple reports of children wearing bicycle helmets getting entrapped on play equipment. Make sure children remove bicycle helmets before using play equipment.
Bicycle helmets are an entrapment hazard that most people don't think of. When children are wearing them in the course of playing on a piece of playground equipment, it basically makes their head larger, and this can cause it to get entangled in places, entrapped in places that we might not otherwise be aware of.
Once you learn how to identify potential hazards, it's important to consider a plan of action in response. What do you need to do to make sure kids don't get hurt? Supervision is not the answer to a playground hazard. You can't protect children from serious hazards by watching them more closely. When a hazard is present, children should not have access to the equipment presenting the hazard. This can be accomplished by removing the equipment, blocking children's ability to get to the equipment, or not using the playground. In addition to protecting the children in your immediate care, you also need to think about the children that will use the equipment later. Make sure you tell your director or the appropriate person in charge of the play area about the hazard. That will ensure that the process of repairing or removing the equipment gets started. Communication is critical. Young children do not need play equipment to play. It's always best to be cautious if you're uncertain about the safety of play equipment.
Vigorous active play can occur without any equipment at all, except for your body. That's the most important piece that you bring to vigorous active play. You can jump in place, you can jump over a line on the floor, you can dance. There are programs that have been set up. The Let's Move program, for example, which was initiated by the president's wife, Michelle Obama. On the Let's Move website, there are very long lists of great ideas of things you can do either indoors or outdoors with young children to get them to be vigorously physically active.